The US is running out of sanctions against Russia. Marco Rubio warns that his administration has already imposed the harshest sanctions ever on Russia. Meanwhile, Republicans have lost local election in the US and could lose the House next year. How does the US run out of options on sanctions against Russia, and what could this mean? Secretary of State Marco Rubio declared after G7 foreign minister meeting that US is running out of things to sanction when it comes to Moscow's economy. Quote, "Well, there is not much left in terms of sanctions. I mean, we hit their big oil companies, but I don't know what else needs to be done. I mean, we are running out of things to sanctions in that regard." Rubio, speaking on the sidelines of the meeting in Canada, emphasized that future efforts will likely focus less on new sanctions and more on enforcing existing ones, particularly targeting the so-called shadow fleet of oil shipments that evade Western restrictions. Earlier this year, Rubio warned that if talks to end the war between Russia and Ukraine fail to produce progress, Washington would press ahead with fresh sanctions, even without a White House sign-off. At the same time, he underscores that US President Donald Trump has not yet pulled the trigger on a new round of sanctions, advising cautious so as not to close the door on diplomacy. If we did what everybody here wants us to do, and that is come in and crush them in more sanctions, we probably lose our ability to talk to them about ceasefire, Rubio told Politico. Moreover, he warns that the president's patience with Russia is infinite. Quote, "The president has shown extraordinary patience, but his patience is not infinite," Rubio told the UN Security Council in September. He also flagged the shadow fleet oil evasion mechanism and suggested that European partners whose geography and shipping infrastructure are often involved have key roles to play. At the same time, by tying further sanctions to the success of diplomacy, the State Department is signaling that economic pressure is becoming less a blunt instrument and more a level of last resort. If Russia refuses to engage in negotiations, Rubio says, then US may deploy additional sanctions. For US allies in Europe, many of whom have urged Washington to impose tougher sanctions, Rubio's comments are a sobering message. The low-hanging fruit of sanctions has been exhausted, and further pressure may now come from targeting complex evasion networks rather than new headline-grabbing names. For Ukraine, the messaging may carry mixed implications. On one hand, US is signaling that while it remains committed to imposing economic sanctions on Russia, the window for doing so is narrowing. On the other hand, this may place greater emphasis on diplomatic outcomes and on Ukraine's willingness to engage in compromise, something Rubio has repeatedly referenced in his broader remarks on the conflict. Meanwhile, China's oil imports from Russia have shown a decline this year, reflecting growing caution among Chinese refineries amid US sanctions targeting Russia's oil producers. According to recent data, crude shipments from Russia to China dropped between 8 and 15% in 2025 compared with previous periods, while the dollar value of these imports fell even more sharply. Several state-owned Chinese refineries, including PetroChina, Sinopec, and Yantian Petroleum Group, have suspended or reduced purchases of seaborne Russian crude oil. Traders say these moves are motivated by fear of potential secondary sanctions, highlighting the ripple effects of Western measures on global oil flows. Yantian, in particular, has launched a tender seeking non-Russian crude oil for delivery from December through mid-February, signaling a strategic shift away from a reliance on Russian supplies. Industry analysts say the tender, combined with the decisions, suggests China is diversifying its import sources to reduce geopolitical and legal risk. Despite the reductions, Russia remains a major supplier of crude oil to Russia, experts caution. However, that also continued declines in seaborne imports could tighten Russia's export market and pressure Moscow to seek alternative buyers. The drop in Russian oil shipments to China underscores the growing influence of US-led sanctions, as well as China's balancing act between securing energy supplies and mitigating exposure to Western financial and legal constraints. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump signed legislation late Wednesday, ending the longest U.S. federal government shutdown in history, restoring funding and reopening government services after more than 6 weeks of impasse. The shutdown, which began on October 1st, when Congress failed to pass a resolution, brought federal operations to halt, left hundreds of thousands of government employees without pay, and disrupted key services across the country. "Quote, we can never let this happen again. This is no way to run a country," Trump said. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, shutdown could permanently erase between $7 billion and $14 billion in U.S. economic output. The same CBO analyst warns that the fourth quarter GDP growth could be reduced by up to 1 to 2% points as a result of the delayed federal spending. A memo from the Council of Economic Advisors estimated that the shutdown could cost up to $15 billion per week of stalled economic activity. The shutdown forced about 750,000 federal employees into furlough and left many more working without pay. The cascade of disruption extended into the travel industry, federal contracting, and private sector firms reliant on government work and consumer spending tied to federal incomes. With the government reopened under the freshly signed bill, back pay will flow to federal employees and many stalled services will resume. But analysts caution that not all the economic damage can be undone. Lost productivity, delayed purchases, and cancelled contracts cannot fully be recovered, meaning some of the losses will remain permanent. Washington now pivots to the next challenge: rebuilding federal workforce morale, restoring contractor supply chains, and ensuring that the budgeting stalemate that triggered the shutdown is addressed so that future funding crises are avoided. The cost of the shutdown is not just measured in billions of dollars and percentage points of growth. The partial shutdown exposed vulnerabilities, how dependent large swathes of the economy are on stable government funding, how quickly private sector firms feel the ripple effects, and how political gridlock can translate into measurable harm for working Americans. As President Trump signs the bill, he stressed that the resolution is temporary and does not settle the broader dispute over healthcare and spending cuts, meaning another funding deadline looms and the risk of future shutdowns remains. Meanwhile, with the 2025 local and state elections, the signs are clear. The Brookings Institution, among others, estimates the Republican Party could lose 28 seats in the U.S. House next year, a margin that would hand control to the Democratic Party. Voters in key contests appear to respond strongly to economic points: cost of living, housing affordability, and frustrations over the recent federal shutdown stood out as recurring themes. In states such as California, voters overwhelmingly approved ballot initiatives which give Democrats a strategic redistricting advantage heading into 2026. Suburban districts and younger voter blocks, once solid ground for Republicans in many regions, shifted more toward Democrats, or at least showed signs of volatility. If Democrats pick up 11-12 seats, as projections suggest, they would reclaim the House majority, even though Republicans currently hold a slim edge. With states like California shifting district control and states like Texas redrawing maps for favor of Republicans, the structural terrain of House is reshaping. The traditional midterm penalty for a party for a sitting president may be mooted, but with voter dissatisfaction rising, economic headwinds building, the conditions feel favorable for Democratic gains. Even if Democrats perform well, how the lines are drawn will determine how many seats they can win. The 2025 election returns suggest Democratic Party is riding momentum into 2026 with suburban voters and other young voters. The House majority is within reach, but final control will hinge on turnout, district maps, and how both parties respond in the months ahead. That's all for today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and glory to Ukraine.